Good morning, Dan and Amy. So Eli Lake, reporting in Bloomberg this morning, suggests something about both the Russian collusion story and investigation, as well as the Obama administration surveillance of Trump associates investigation, the unmasking, the leaking, that both stories are something burgers. Depending on where the facts lead, writes Lake, we will know whether Obama's National Security Advisor Susan Rice was justified in unmasking the names of Trump transition officials, or whether the media's obsession with the government's Russia investigation was warranted. I'm persuaded that that's the case, and there's mounting evidence that even though it's a something burger, the Democrats who are obsessed with this narrative, and I include all the Democrats in the D.C. press corps as well, they're having a difficult time proving up, and they're, I think, on the clock. They're starting to run out of time. Here's Brad Sherman, a Democrat, on with Tucker Carlson the other night, admitting that they have no evidence on the Russian collusion.
I don't know anything about Paul Manafort. I'm merely saying these guys are being held up as Russian agents who changed the outcome of the election, and isn't it incumbent upon elected officials and the agencies to provide some proof that they did something wrong?
We need an investigation. There's no proof that any American did anything wrong.
There's no proof that any American did anything wrong. Democrat Brad Sherman. For more on both of these stories and much more, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Byron York. He, the chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Byron, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, folks.
So where do you come down on the two sides where both sides have people essentially suggesting everybody on the other side should be in prison?
Well, I think they're both stories. I think that the one thing you have to remember is the substance of the case will decide what happens. So the investigation began, and the question still is, did Donald Trump or his associates collude with the Russians to try to influence the 2016 election? And now a second question that has come to light, which is pretty important, did the Obama administration spy on Trump or members of his transition team or associates? There are answers to both of those questions. We don't really know what they are right now, but there are answers to them, and we'll find them out.
Well, then you have President Trump telling the New York Times that Susan Rice may have committed a crime. So what do you think he knows that we might not know?
Well, I don't know. He's president of the United States. He's privy to all of the classified information on this. But what we need now is not one more person characterizing the evidence. We need to actually see the evidence. So we had Devin Nunes go to the White House and look at these documents and come out and characterize them to some degree. We've had Adam Schiff, the Democrat, go to the White House, look at the same documents, be very quiet, kind of silent on them afterwards. We've had the president say that he thinks, the question was posed to him, do you think Susan Rice had committed a crime? And he said yes. So we don't know. What we need is to actually see the evidence, and then we can judge for ourselves.
What's your sense of what the clock is on this? How long can both sides extend out these concurrent investigations without getting to a conclusion?
Well, the clock's pretty long on it. And what will happen is if an investigation goes on for a very long time and no evidence is presented of something, people will just kind of declare the party's not guilty and move on. And I think that's true with the Trump collusion question. You just played what Brad Sherman said, the Democrat from California. We've had others say that, the investigation is just beginning and we can't know these things. Well, James Comey, the FBI director, told the House committee a couple of weeks ago the investigation began in July of 2016.
Right.
So it is not just beginning. And so basically, we'll see. But clearly, if this thing just goes on and Democrats are continually, quote, asking questions, but not presenting any evidence, then, it's going to go away.
Well, and one of the things too is, as much criticism as there is of Trump and messaging consistency and Republicans messaging consistency, you've got Brad Sherman, Democrat, saying there's no proof that any American did anything wrong. And you have Julian Castro, Democrat, on the House Intel Committee, saying he wouldn't be surprised if Trump associates go to prison. So those are two very different statements.
Yeah, it is. And Julian Castro said, I wish I could tell you the name, but I'm sorry, I can't. So I think people have just kind of had enough of these teasing games and just want to see some evidence. Because, look, this is extremely serious. There's no doubt that some Democrats hope to use this to remove the president from office. I mean, that's how serious they are about it. So if there is actual evidence to back this up, we need to see it. And the Senate, they sound like they're just kind of settling in for a long, leisurely investigation. Who knows when that's going to start? And the House guys are squabbling with each other, although if it brings out some of the Susan Rice evidence, then the squabbling will have turned out to be at least more productive for public knowledge than the Senate collegiality. But we need to know something, and we need to know it fairly soon.
Byron York here, joining us this morning. I wanted to ask you about Steve Bannon. Yesterday afternoon, we learned that he lost his seat at the NSC. So who's in and who pushed for this change?
Well, I think this is clearly the influence of Henry McMaster, the national security advisor who President Trump hired after getting rid of Michael Flynn. And it was known going in that McMaster wanted to run a more conventional national security council, and that makes sense. And he wanted his own people on it, and that makes sense with the approval of the president, of course. And the inclusion of Bannon, it's not as if Steve Bannon cannot go attend some National Security Council meeting if there is a need for it. The same was true with Karl Rove in the George W. Bush White House. But being a member of it seemed to be a stretch at the time. And so it seems to me this is just basically a correction. And I do think McMaster had a certain amount of leverage on this, because you don't want to lose a second national security advisor. So I think Trump has given him some leeway, and he's made the right decision. This is not like Bannon has been just kicked out of the White House. It was an extraordinary thing for him to be on the council to begin with.
Although the Politico reporting that Bannon on this issue was near kicking himself out of the White House. He was near quitting, and there seems to be friction between him and Jared Kushner. At least that's what's being reported. The Politico suggesting that a confidant of Bannon's and a mega donor, Rebecca Mercer, had to talk him into staying in the White House. So where do you get a sense of that the Trump inner circle is at this moment, with Pence being dispatched to try and get Obamacare replaced 2.0 together, and then this power struggle, perhaps that's what's being reported over national security issues?
Well, I mean, my sense is that people shouldn't really spend a lot of time worrying too much about this inside baseball stuff, and they should look and see what the Trump White House does. And obviously the president started off with a lot of executive action, some of it quite successful, others less so. We're going to get the confirmation of the Supreme Court justice this week, and then there's this healthcare debacle, and the question is, will Trump push Republicans to come up with some sort of agreement, basically within the same framework they had before and failed, or will he go outside the circle of the Republican leadership to look either to other Republicans or to Democrats? I think those are the really kind of important questions as they determine the policy. I think, Jared and Steve are looking at each other sideways, and that kind of stuff is less interesting than what the Trump White House actually does.
I wanted to take up another issue, too, because this seems to me a real failure of both Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress in the first 100 days. And it's been exacerbated by this Washington Post story about the IRS literally basically stealing millions of dollars from innocent people that were targeted under the so-called structuring under the Bank Secrecy Act in terms of how they deposited money into their bank accounts. Department of Justice looking for quick hits that turned out to be wrong. According to an Inspector General's report, people were not obtaining any money illegally in 91% of the cases that were randomly sampled. And so now you've got this IRS abuse stealing people's money, their legitimate money, as well as the political and religious targeting of the IRS under the previous regime. John Koskinen is still the IRS commissioner. Lois Lerner is still taking the fifth, and there's been no addressing the abuses or the abusers over at IRS. Why?
Boy, I think you just made a great case for President Trump to make a priority of cleaning up the IRS. Boy, how popular would that be?
Right.
And not just now because it's tax time, but I mean 6 months from now, 6 months or 2 months ago when he takes office. I mean, this would be a hugely popular priority for the president. Plus, it would be the right thing to do. That's always a plus. So this is, I'm not calling it a missed opportunity, but certainly it's something the president should prioritize. I think we saw a tweet from the president last night, and it was just jobs, jobs, jobs. And there are a lot of Republican strategists who were heartened to hear that, to hear him pressing forward on the jobs and wages agenda, which is why he got elected. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of things, and I'm not sure repealing Obamacare is on the list, but there are a number of things the president can do to pursue the primary reason he got elected, which is to fix the economy, create more jobs at higher wages, and that's what he should be concentrating on, and not stealing America's money via the IRS would be a good part of that.
Yes, right. He is Byron York, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Byron, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, folks.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.